All right, everybody, welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video will be looking at the easiest and hardest fantasy hockey schedules for the upcoming NHL season. But first, the video is always sponsored by FanDuel Canada, North America's #1 sportsbook, the best place to be placing your NHL wagers. And for right now, your NFL and college football wagers as well. Tons of new things going on in the app, so be sure to check that out. The link is in the description below to download. We're going to be mainly looking at the 5 teams with the easiest schedules and 5 teams with the hardest schedules. I will say a lot of the teams with the hardest schedules are the worst teams in the NHL, and a lot of the teams with the easy schedules are some of the better teams in the NHL. But we'll talk about some of those teams in between, like right in the middle, why these schedules matter and why you should care about them for your fantasy. All right, so we look at the teams with the 5 hardest schedules here. You obviously see the Canadians, you see the Blue Jackets. You're going to see a decent amount of Eastern Conference teams. I think the Eastern Conference is a little bit more balanced. There's fewer bottom feeders than they are in the West with teams like the Sharks, Anaheim. And Anaheim is on this list as well at 4. You have Chicago at 3, and then Pittsburgh at 5, and some other mediocre to good teams at that 6 to 10 range in terms of top 10 hardest schedules. The Lightning and Bruins are in the top 10, but it goes back to the fact that why the Canadians are number 1. I would say, the Atlantic Division, Metro are the 2 hardest divisions in the NHL. The Atlantic is incredibly tough now, especially because these teams continue to get better. The Red Wings obviously are gotten better over the last 2 years. Buffalo had a down year last year, but I think they'll be able to bounce back this year. Obviously, a team with 2 really solid goaltenders as well. And then you have the Sens, who should be better this year as well. People keep saying that about the Senators, but still. Canadians, really tough schedule here. Obviously going to play every team in the Atlantic about 4 times. And those are teams that definitely have some really solid offenses, but I think for the Canadians, you can't see it as like the worst thing in the world because some of the teams do have, I would say, a little bit softer defenses. You can kind of see it. Like obviously the Red Wings, I wouldn't say they're super defensive. I think they rely a little bit too heavily on Moritz Seider, and then their goaltending is very, very average. With Husso, Lyon, amongst others who will kind of be filling in for that cast this year as well. The Lightning probably will be better defensively, picking up a little bit more. They lost Sergachev, but they get Ryan McDonough. I think Vasilevsky will play better. Obviously, one of the worst statistical years of his career. The Sabres weren't great defensively last year. Probably will be, I would think, at the same ballpark at this point because of their young, inexperienced defensive unit right now. But I think they have solid goaltending, so that could help them there. But for the Canadians as a whole, and the picture I'm trying to get across here, it doesn't matter if they have the hardest schedule. They're still going to play a bunch of teams that have weaker defensive units and goalies. So there's still guys that are going to be fantasy viable. Like, don't look at the Canadians saying they have the hardest schedule and just be like, I'm not drafting Slavkovsky, I'm not drafting Cole Caulfield, I'm not drafting Suzuki or Laine. I think that's a mistake. I think there's a lot of players that could actually break out on this team this year. I think Cole Caulfield could have a big year. I think Slavkovsky could break out this year. I think Laine will get back to his 30 goal scoring ways. There's just ways you're going to have to evade some of these tougher matchups with replacing with players on your bench. Obviously, the Blue Jackets, I would say, coming in at number 2. It's almost tougher in the Metropolitan Division because I think it's almost even more balanced, you could say. It's similar, but I think the Metro has some really top tier talent. With the Rangers, the Hurricanes, and the Devils, I can almost confidently say at least the Rangers and the Devils, those 2 teams will finish in the top 6 in goals against or goals allowed. I'll say in terms of being really good defensively. Islanders, I think will be a better team this year. I don't think the Penguins will be very good. I don't think the Capitals will be any better than they were last year, and I think the Flyers could be about the same as last year, if not maybe a little bit better, depending on how some of their younger guys develop. But some of these teams are definitely susceptible as well, and there's some guys on the Blue Jackets that I think you could be looking at. Adam Fantilli, will be a big year for him, but all those also that, they had that Russian line last year, or that European line, if you want to call it that, with Marchenko, Voronkov, and then Chinakhov as well. I think Marchenko and Chinakhov are in for some big years, as well as Adam Fantilli, and then Zach Werenski is always a guy you're going to want to draft and play. I know his stats haven't been super glamorous, but he gets the ice time and he continues to play a ton of minutes as their focal point on the defensive unit for them. And then the Blackhawks, the Ducks, and the Penguins. Looking at these 3 teams, to be honest, other than maybe Tyler Bertuzzi and Connor Bedard, I wouldn't be looking at too many players on this Blackhawks team. And, this kind of helps that point as well. I wouldn't be looking at really at any of their defensemen as someone I would really want to have on my team, maybe as like a plug and play some weeks, but most of the time, looking at their schedule right now, it's not going to be very, very easy. The Central is absolutely stacked, and there's some really good teams in the Pacific, obviously, starting off with Edmonton there too. And then the Ducks, I think Trevor Zegras is due for a big year. If you watch the breakout or bounce back video so far this year, you see Trevor Zegras is a guy I think will be able to bounce back. I think last year was just a weird anomaly year with too much shit going on off the ice, and then there's so much other talent around him. Cutter Gauthier, Frank Vetrano kind of had a breakout year last year. I think he'll be due for some regression regression, I'd probably be staying away from him. Mason McTavish, Leo Carlson, obviously, and even on defense as well. So I don't think the Ducks are going to really be that much improved, but I think we'll see a little bit more structure from this team in the next upcoming NHL season. And then the Penguins at 5. Like, this team just got so much worse over the last 2 years, and you still have all these older guys like Crosby. I wouldn't say declined last year. He was fantastic, but I would say Letang and Malkin probably did. Letang, especially defensively, is becoming even more of a liability at this point. So Penguins players, I'd be interesting to see. I wouldn't be a guy obviously jumping on Rutger McGroarty as well. Like, he still has so much to prove at this point, even though he did just get traded to Pittsburgh. So I wouldn't be really looking at a guy like Michael Bunting either, I don't think. Defensively as well, just also a liability. And in bangers leagues, this is where he would, I guess, kind of have a point of emphasis. I don't think there's much there. Looking at teams like Boston and Tampa Bay with how their schedules play out, again, there's some top tier talent within their division. I think Boston as a whole won't be, as good last year. I think they're due for a little bit of aggression here. They lose, or they gain Elias Lindholm, but they lose Linus Ullmark. So there's a lot more pressure on Jeremy Swayman. And now you have, Korpisalo as the backup there in Boston too. I don't know how well that will work. I think Swayman's fantastic, but him to put up the same numbers he did last year, instead of starting 40 games, he's going to be starting 55 plus games. I think it'll be a tall ask, especially because I think he made Boston's defensive unit look a hell of a lot better last year than I think they actually were. The Lightning, I think, will be better as a whole here, especially adding Jake Gensel, having Vasilevsky back, and should be better than last year. I think the Lightning will be fine, and you shouldn't look at this schedule hindrance as anything that should hurt them. All right, now looking at the teams with the easiest schedules, as I mentioned in the intro, it's going to be a lot of these teams that are just better. Like the Oilers do play a lot of bottom feeders in the NHL, just being in the division that they are in and how the landscape of the NHL is kind of at right now. So they get lucky in that sense, but they are the best team. So, you end up playing all the other teams that are worse than you. And then you have the Colorado Avalanche, the Dallas Stars, the Vancouver Canucks, and the LA Kings. The Canucks and the Kings, I think, are interesting cases there, and we will get into that. But looking at those top 3 teams, there's going to be so many different players you're going to be able to use in fantasy hockey. The amount of shots on, just think about like the Corsi percentage for these 3 teams going up against those teams like San Jose, Anaheim, Columbus, even Montreal and stuff, but mainly those bottom feeders in the West, even like Utah as well. I know a lot of people are a little bit higher on Utah this year. I don't think their team got all that better. Sure, they got Mikhail Sergachev, but still think that's going to be a team that, like, these top teams in the West will be able to beat up on, throughout their given matchups in the NHL season. So obviously the Oilers, looking at the Oilers, the one thing I will say, if you're looking between Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner was so bad last year, especially defensively. And we know Edmonton has struggled with their defensive forwards and really just defensively as a whole. They've been way more focused on offense. So I think if Jeff Skinner does become a liability, I don't think we're going to see him in very certain situations, so he won't be getting a ton of ice time. Victor Arvidsson, on the other hand, is a guy that I think can play in so many different situations, is helpful on the PK probably if he needs, power play, 5-on-5 in all aspects. So I think Victor Arvidsson is a better option fantasy-wise than Jeff Skinner. Avalanche, you're looking at the same kind of team here. Nathan McKinnon led the NHL in goals above replacement last year. I don't think that would really change a whole lot. Him and Rantanen, that top line, all of this team. Drew, I think, will still be another player you'll be able to look at this year for sure. There's some other younger guys on Colorado as well. But those 3 teams, they do have obviously a crop of really good players. Looking at the Dallas Stars as that last team, 3rd easiest schedule so far for this upcoming season. Wyatt Johnson, Logan Stankoven, Maverick Bourque. Some of these younger guys could be breaking out, but you should be looking at top guys like Jason Robertson. Obviously, I wouldn't say he had a down year last year at all, but for whatever reason, it was relatively quiet as this Dallas Stars team just continued to score and score. I'll look at Jason Robertson as a guy I want to be drafting this year for sure, as well as Wyatt Johnson, who I think is still underrated despite how good he was in the playoffs last year and near the end of that season. The Canucks and the Kings are interesting scenarios because all year last year, everyone called the Canucks the PDO merchants because they had an insanely high save percentage at the beginning of the year with how well Thatcher Demko was playing and even Casey DeSmith. And then also their shooting percentage was really high with the amount of shots they were actually getting. They weren't necessarily dominating games, but they were creating quality over quantity. Brock Besser was a perfect example of that through the first half of the season. It ended up balancing out a little bit. They ended up losing the playoffs. Obviously, Thatcher Demko was out. Could have been a different story. But I would be a little bit weary with some of their players this year, but I think there's still a lot of hope for some of the newcomers coming into this team. I think Höglander could have a good year, playing up in the lineup. And I still think DeBrusk, after what he showed last year, going from playing with a guy to Patrice Bergeron, Bergeron to Charlie Coyle, and now you get Elias Pettersson probably as your center. I think that makes a big difference, and we'll see his numbers closer to what they were when he was with Bergeron. And then the Kings are interesting too. Easiest schedule. You know, I was pretty high on Cam Talbot last year at the beginning of the season, or heading into the season. It was a guy I said you should draft as your third goalie, and he started off super hot. I think we could see similar numbers to Darcy Kemper here, or something happened to Darcy Kemper for whatever reason over the last 3 years. Seems like any older goalie that goes to LA has like a revitalized career. David Riddick last year, they picked him up pretty much off the street, and he put up fantastic numbers, ended up playing in the playoffs as well. So Darcy Kemper, you know, was a guy who put up very solid, obviously won a Stanley Cup with Colorado, had a good season with Washington. The last year was just horrific, so it can't get worse. And I think he's going to be playing in front of a much better defensive unit, much better defensive forwards. And then I think as a whole, you have like Vladislav Gavrikov. You know, he lost his defensive partner, Matt Roy, going over to Washington. But I think Gavrikov was actually this focal piece of that duo and is the better defenseman. You bring up Brandt Clark, you know, a guy like Jordan Spence. You add Joel Edmondson. I think the forward adds weren't great, but I still think you're looking at those top guys. Kevin Fiala should have a big year. Anze Kopitar, Adrian Kempe. You know, Quentin Byfield, another guy you should be looking at too. And then Darcy Kemper, I think, is a dark horse for actually someone who could really, I wouldn't say turn his career around, but really have a bounce back year considering what we saw from him last season. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of the easiest and hardest schedules. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what else you guys want to see on the channel before the NHL season starts, and I'll see you guys in the next video.